Joining us right now, I'm delighted to say, is Conservative MP and former Brexit Secretary David Davis. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for joining us. So much to talk about with you. Can we start, first of all, with Ireland and what's going on there? We are expecting a press conference from the First Minister of Scotland, leader of the SNP, Humza Yousaf, at midday at Bute House, the home of the First Minister. It does seem very likely, the expectation is that he will announce his resignation. This after he basically threw the Greens out of his coalition in power at Holyrood, and it's basically one short of majority, facing confidence votes in not just him, but the government as a whole later this week. Can't do it unless he does a deal with the Labour Party, headed by Alex Salmond. Big falling out. He's ex-SNP leader and ex-First Minister himself. And, of course, he relies on the vote from the one Labour MSP, and that, of course, is Ash Regan. And a deal has not been done, we understand. If Humza Yousaf does announce his resignation, will that be a great loss to Scotland?
No, not really. I mean, what you're seeing with the refusal to do a deal with Alba is that Mr. Yusuf is still under the control of Mrs. Sturgeon and Mr. Swinney. He was put in as the continuity candidate, and he's still doing what he's told. And of course, it will be the end of it. I mean, it will finish him, and there'll be, I guess, a runoff for another leader. And there are a variety of people, all SNP. They'll still have the same problem when they succeed there, I'm afraid. I mean,
well, exactly, yeah, the situation doesn't really change. But in terms of his leadership, you said he was very much seen as, the obviously the success of the heir in waiting to Nicola Sturgeon. But, he has stood over policies that are already pretty much in place, but carried on pushing through with the hate crime bill. Hilariously, the first week of that coming in, he was the subject of most of the complaints of hate crimes. The absolute nonsense pushing of trans ideology at the expense of women's and children's safety. And, of course, also climate change targets were completely unfulfillable and I would say undesirable. And it was that was finally the issue that broke the camel's back with the Greens, who felt that he was reneging on a deal with them. I mean, the man has pushed absolute nonsense. Meanwhile, Scottish economy in bad nick. The NHS there, the education system. I mean, they've almost kind of forgotten that they're supposed to run a country.
Yeah, I'm afraid that's right. I mean, most of those in fact, all of those mad policies you talked about were, to a very large extent, authored by the Greens. So I don't think they're going to have a very good time when they have another election. And you're right. I mean, don't forget, Scotland is still heavily subsidised. I mean, the Barnett formula means we spend a lot more on every aspect of public service in Scotland than we do in England. Yet they underperform on every front. We have complaints in England about the National Health Service and about education. Actually, Scotland does much worse on nearly every measure, and it's in a downward decline as well. So you're right. They're spending too much time on internal politics and fighting each other, and this may sound familiar, and not enough time on actually running the country. Yeah. So they go to an election, although the nationalist tendency is very dominant in Scotland, it's now becoming a split entity with Alba on the one side, and people will start punishing them for poor performance, poor delivery of the things that matter. At the end of the day, people may care about independence, but what comes first is their family, the health service, the education, the public services, and that's where they're falling down. Yeah,
indeed. And it's also fascinating, isn't it, as well, with Labour. They've signed up to loads of these policies, and the Liberal Democrats. They've fully signed up to the trans madness, to the eco madness. So they've fully signed up to it. So I don't know what they're suddenly complaining about, other than the fact that they're not nationalists, they're not pro-independence. We shall see what happens there and who ends up taking over. Let's talk about Ireland now, because you were there involved closely with those negotiations with the EU during the post-Brexit referendum, pre-actual Brexit years. What do you make of we're calling it delicious irony, that Ireland is now complaining that Channel migrants who travelled over from France have come to Britain that we're not allowed to send back to France because, we're not in the EU anymore, and they're travelling over to this country, and now a bunch of them are saying, oh, hold on a minute, the Rwanda bill might mean we get detained and we get deported to Rwanda. They're travelling over to Northern Ireland and then crossing the open border with the Republic of Ireland to escape being deported to Rwanda. And the Irish government is saying the British need to take them back. The irony being, of course, that under the Irish law currently it's not safe, according to the courts, for them to send back to Britain because they could be deported to Rwanda, regarded as an unsafe country. But they're demanding we take them back. British government has said, first time ever, showing a bit of backbone, by the way, OK, we'll take them back, but the EU has to agree that France has to take back the migrants who've come across the channel. You couldn't make this stuff up, could you?
No, you couldn't. I mean, if ever there was a problem of a country and government's own creation, this is it. I mean, we offered them. I mean, I offered them an invisible border in Ireland, but which we monitored. We had proper surveillance on. I mean, heavens above, that border's got more surveillance than most borders in the world already. And they refused on pure ideological grounds. And until I was overruled or undermined, you pick your own word, by Theresa May, that was the policy we were going to do. And at the time, the leader of HMRC here, the head of the tax authority and customs authority in Ireland, both said it was doable, and they turned it down. As I say, for pure ideological reasons, with one eye on Sinn Féin, I guess, and the United arguments. And so it's come back to haunt them. So it's a hypocritical paradox for the Irish government, but it's also a hypocritical paradox for the European Union, because, as you say, we can't send people back, illegal migrants back to France as it stands, and that same rule applies to Ireland. So, I think we'll take them the moment the whole European Union law is changed. They're happy voluntary members of the European Union, but until then, I'm afraid they've got to deal with their own problem. It's also, just as an aside on this, and I speak as somebody who's had his doubts about the Rwanda policy. Yeah. It is a bit of a demonstration it's working.
I know. I think we were all surprised when we saw that was the biggest shock of all of this, was it not? But I mean, even if it works on that small level, that provides some sort of hope. I think once you only have a handful of people going over, and you're playing the odds. I'm not entirely sure that it will work on the scale we need it to work. It's not like an Australia-style policy where you just never even step onto the shores. But the key thing here is sort of the reality of what the whole of Europe is facing. And we see this happening in America as well with the Mexican border, that the sheer scale of the number of people who are willing to come, willing to make these hazardous journeys. We saw those deaths last week, the hand-wringing by the Liberal Bleeding Heart Brigade last week. Well, yeah, you're supporting a policy that encourages the people smugglers, are they not, and risks those lives. But actually, we're not going to resolve this unless countries work together and agree we are going to be, I'm sorry, but pretty hard, come down hard on these people.
Yeah, but I agree. But let's not lose sight of one fundamental issue here, and that is this problem was massively exacerbated by Germany's approach of letting, I think it was 1 million migrants in under Angela Merkel. Yeah. And of course, sent a message around the world, and certainly a message around all of North Africa and near Asia, that, OK, come to Europe and you'll get looked after one way or another. And they've all got these problems now. So Germany's actively looking, you're actively looking at a Rwanda policy. A Rwanda or Ghana, I think, is their two options. So's Denmark.
Rwanda's going to be very busy soon.
Exactly. We may be happy to have got in first, as it were. Denmark has already started down that route. Italy and Austria have similar policies. And, of course, the European Union, the irony of all, the real highest irony of all this is that van der Leyen, the president of the Commission's party, is now saying, we want to have what they call a third country option. That's the Rwanda option. So it looks as though, number one, it's already working even before a single plane's taken off. Number two, we're going to be copied by all of Europe. So I think there are lessons to be learned in that, both for, as you say, the sort of wet liberal tendency, but also, frankly, for some of the members of my own party at the other extreme to go, it can't work as it stands. Just watch this space.
Absolutely. Always great to have your thoughts. David Davis, Conservative MP, former Brexit Secretary. Thank you very much indeed.